Hello and welcome. I'm Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'm going to be talking about three incidents that took place during the 1990s involving darker skinned aliens. The first one involves a alien autopsy that's a bit sketchy. The second one you might be familiar with, it's the Varginha UFO crash. And I have some videotape that was snuck out, actual videotape of the alien in that crash. The third one involves an individual by the name of Dan Burrish, a microbiologist who supposedly worked in Area 51 and had a one-on-one communication with a darker skinned alien called JROD. Stay tuned, should be a fascinating podcast. Okay, so I came across this while I was going through my Twitter feed, and it's labeled as a alien autopsy, and I'm going to show it. There's going to be a lot of panting and over breathing, and right away I got a bit suspicious. But when you get to the alien autopsy part, you'll see that the alien doesn't quite look lifelike. There's something about the eyes and the mouth that made me curious because I couldn't figure out how he could have faked the eyes and the mouth. Here it is without further ado. This is an individual that supposedly took this video of a craft that he saw. He went into the woods and he ran into this alien, which he later took back to his home and did a homemade autopsy on it. Here we go.
Focus.
You can see there how there's a lot of overbreathing and panting. And yeah, if somebody's really excited and near panic, they would be breathing like that, but it doesn't seem natural. Gonna skip ahead a little bit here.
Come on, work.
Okay, so he's having trouble with his camera. This is the craft. Okay, there it is. That's a better shot of it right there. Okay, so the next part of the video, you're going to see the actual autopsy. He brings the alien, brings the alien body back to his home, and supposedly this alien had killed his pet dog by ripping it in half. So he had taken a branch from a tree nearby and hit it on the head. So this alien that you're about to see has a big gash on the back of the head. There the eyes, there, and mouth. So right there, it doesn't look very real, but the eyes keep opening and closing, and I'm not sure how he was able to do that. I'm going to move forward a bit here in the autopsy, where it actually touches the head. So you can see the eyes opening there. Not sure how he's doing that. And there's a big gash in the back of the head there, where he supposedly hit it with the branch that he found in the woods after this alien had ripped his dog apart. So he's trying to open the alien's eyes. That's the blood from the wound in the back of the head where he struck the alien. Okay, so after seeing that, I mean, the eyes really got me. I couldn't figure out if it was a hoax, how he got the eyes to look that real. So I did more digging and I found out who the person was that submitted this video. And his name is Dr. Jonathan Reed. This is a book written by Jonathan Reed called Link that he wrote about the incident. It's called An Extraterrestrial Odyssey, the true story of alien contact. Reed has received backlash from the UFO community since going public. And then in 2010, in an episode of the show Fact or Fake Paranormal, he went on the show and the experts on that show tried to debunk his story. The Fact or Faked team was able to duplicate the entire Reed video, nearly shot to shot. They even did a voice stress test on Reed.
You're being extremely honest and open, and that's all I ask. It's just a frank, honest discussion here. As many people have said, if true, it could be the biggest thing since the Roswell, New Mexico crash in 47. Or it could be the greatest, fraud of all time.
But I always have to say and bring it back to one thing. This is just my truth. It's my case. It's my story. It's what happened to me.
Yeah, he said that he was a doctor at a university, but no one was able to verify his credentials, which is very suspect.
We killed the messenger off.
Well, hear me out here, please.
Let me finish.
No, I've given you all this time to talk, okay? But just hear me out and hear what I have to say.
Okay.
There are so many things about this that just don't add up.
Everybody has their own opinion, but that's okay. And I've continued to say that all the way along. I don't expect people to believe it. I wouldn't believe it either if it didn't happen to me.
Okay, so I think they pretty much debunked Reed's story. This is a picture of the alien. This is the craft. And this is some sort of a bracelet that the alien was wearing, whereby he could communicate with his craft. His credentials were never verified. And I think that we can pretty much say that this was a hoax. So if you guys see this video on your Twitter feed or on YouTube, you can pretty much dismiss it. I'm pretty sure it's been debunked, and I'm not an expert, but I just wanted to show you guys what the experts on the show Fact or Fiction Paranormal discovered after studying Reed testimony and his video. Here's another shot of the alien's 9-foot-long craft. This was the tracking device that Reed said the alien wore on his wrist, kept him in contact with the craft. It did turn from silver to black when it was put on the alien's arm. He seems to have disappeared, and there's no trace of him now. As I said, his credentials couldn't be verified. He did say before disappearing that he was being pursued by black ops agents from the government. So regardless whether Jonathan Reed's story is true or not, it certainly is captivating. And when you see the video, especially for the first time, it's shocking because of his panting, his reaction in the video. And then when you actually see the alien, as I said, the eyes and the mouth is what got me. The body itself didn't look very lifelike. So that was my coverage of the Jonathan Reed 1996 alien autopsy. Another incident that occurred in 1996 was the Varginha UFO crash in Brazil. And that also involved a dark-skinned alien. So on January the 20th, 1996, a UFO UAP was supposedly shot down over Varginha, Brazil. Shortly after the crash, the Brazilian military appeared at the crash site and cordoned off the area. There was a lot of military presence in Varginha, Brazil that morning. This is what they looked like, very dark skinned with red eyes. Somehow somebody was able in 1996 to get actual footage of the dark-skinned, red-eyed alien. Here we go. This is the actual footage that was not confiscated, and somehow somebody was able to get this out in 2024. This is actual footage that somebody took of the real Varginha, Brazil alien, dark-skinned with red eyes. There you go. That's actual footage. This is not CGI. Everything else is CGI before and after, but this part here is the actual alien from the Varginha, Brazil UFO crash. Aliens that had passed away was brought in to one of the local doctors for examination and for an x-ray. Of course, the soldiers collected the x-ray images before even the doctor could see them. So a lot of you might be familiar with these girls from that documentary Moment of Contact by James Fox. They are probably the most famous witnesses of the dark-skinned, red-eyed aliens, because they ran into them in an alley after taking a shortcut to bypass this barricade. And he was crouching down. He was probably injured, afraid, probably not as afraid as the girls when they saw him. They ran off. Yeah, they had no idea what it was. They thought it was some sort of a devil. So they ran off. So the story that they told has captivated people for over 2 decades now, those 3 girls. There was also a police officer involved that actually made contact with one of the injured aliens. Yeah, there was a military police officer that actually made contact with the alien, and there was something about the alien's skin that made the officer sick, and he later died from the contact that he had with the alien's skin. The aliens were moved to a local military base. Various pieces of the craft or the wreckage were collected. It was also reported that there was another UFO searching for the downed craft and their companions. So 5 bodies and several pieces of wreckage were collected from the crash at Varginha. The bodies were later supposedly transferred to Area 52 for study. So these are also dark-skinned aliens, and they fit the usual characteristics of a gray alien, except for the fact that they have darker skin and red eyes as opposed to gray skin and black eyes. So the alien in the first alien autopsy with Jonathan Reed was dark-skinned. Okay, granted, it was probably a hoax, not 100% sure. Some of that footage of the craft and the alien's eyes looked almost real, but the Varginha alien and that footage has never been debunked, and it was also dark-skinned. I ran across some footage of Dan Burrish. He was a famous whistleblower during the 1990s. He was, I believe, a microbiologist, some sort of a scientist working at Area 51, and he had a one-on-one communication with a dark-skinned alien by the name of JROD. So I thought it was coincidental that all 3 incidents involved dark-skinned aliens. Here's a description of Dan Burrish himself describing what JROD looked like.
Can you describe in detail the first time, what it was like to meet the first time?
It was fear, excitement, complete astonishment, It looked like a giant insect, being dark brown and hunched in a corner, very insectoid.
Dark brown, he said it right there. And he looks just like the alien from the Virginia leaked video. Dark-skinned, possibly black eyes from that sketch. You can't really tell because it's a sketch.
In appearance, it almost looked like it had an exoskeleton. I felt afraid inside.
Okay, now I'm going to show some footage from Night Shift, the podcast. And there's some footage of Michael Schratt, a very detail-oriented UFO researcher. He actually based his presentation on the testimony of Dan Burrish. Towards the end, he says that they had developed such a relationship, Dan Burrish and JROD, that he actually pushed him through a Stargate, which brought him back home. Mind you, I'll explain about the Stargate later, but here's the part where he talks about Dan Burrish pushing JROD through the Stargate so that he can actually go back home. Okay, so this was taken from Night Shift.
In 2003, something interesting happened. JROD was moved from his position within the Clean Sphere 4-5 facility. He was flown to Abydos Temple, which is down the Nile River. Perhaps some of you have been there, actually. And remember, he has to be in his own positive pressure atmospheric environment or he'll die. So they ended up building a stroller for him. This is Dr. Dan Burrish's illustration of what that stroller actually looked like. And recall, too, that they were friends at the time. So Dan Burrish was sad that JROD could not go home to his family and be with his family. He had a compassion for him. So in this act of compassion, during the accessing by the government of one of these naturally occurring stargates at Abydos Temple, Dan Burrish thrust forward that stroller and pushed Kayla into this stargate, sending him home. However, Dan and the stroller device were kicked out. He got into a lot of trouble for this, but it was an act of compassion on Dr. Dan Burrish.
And that's Clint there down in the bottom. He's the host of Night Shift. And I want to thank Clint and Night Shift for the use of his content. So this is Dan Burrish, Life and Work. I found this on Vimeo. And this is when I think this is the first time that I ever saw Dan Burrish. And it's a very secluded interview that he did apparently in a hotel room. And it's about an hour and a half, way too long to actually show on this podcast. But I just wanted to show a few highlights because he comes across as a bit smug, but he talks about so much detail, which Michael Schratt turned into his presentation, that he comes across as kind of believable because he knows so much about the goings-on in Area 51 and the actual layout of Area 51.
Starting up 1991 time frame, I was cleared for working past groom to the Papoose mountain facility, that place that doesn't exist, about 90 miles north of here. That's how I came to work there. My original assignment was at the Groom Lake facility to review histopathology slides. And I went through nearly a year's testing and then was basically let loose for a year, and I heard no contact from them. After that, I was brought back in and shown some higher grade slides of unknown origin. Following that, I was introduced into a working group and subsequently brought into the Papoose facility, the Site 4 facility. We worked for well over a year on slides of unknown origin. After I took a minimum leadership position under several of the other biologists who are already present, most of which are now deceased, I was then introduced into the level 4-5 facility, and the 4-5 coded for 9. You're again aware, we covered this in ancient history. And so what we did is introduce the new members, myself amongst them, into the clean sphere area, and we were eventually shown the subject for which we were examining the slides. The slides were unusual in that they were in pressurized cells, and they were reviewed by us on a conveyor with a completely automatic microscope. We weren't touching anything. We'd give verbal commands. At the second instance, we were finally allowed to have a VRML, like keyboard, for examining the slides, and I digressed, but then working with the JROD itself in the ambassadorial suite or the CleanSphere suite.
Now, was this under this Project Aquarius?
Yes, yes. Initially, I was assigned as a working member of Project Aquarius. Then finally, I was made an assistant working group leader. And then mysteriously, after one meeting with the JROD, I was asked to take the working group leader position.
Yeah, I'm going to jump ahead more.
CleanSphere glass. Hold my hand up and mimic certain signs. And it became a joke. It really did. It became a joke. Those folks who were watching from the gallery running the show thought that I was standing there and mimicking the signs, and this was the only communication underway. They perceived on the day that the approach, the close approach that he made, the grabbing incident that he did with me, they perceived.
So he's talking about an incident where JROD supposedly jumped on top of Dan Burrish and downloaded a lot of information. And the scientists that were there, the onlookers, thought that he was being attacked.
Perceived that there was a communication that occurred. So I began getting questioned quite extensively whether or not he in fact was communicating with me, because he had promised not to, apparently, with the Sigma unit. I alluded to the fact that there was conversation underway, but I didn't talk about what it was until, of course, I was caught. And at that time, the deal was brokered to find out about the doctrine for the convergent timeline paradox. I told them a little bit about what he showed me, a little bit, and they told me a little.
He's referring there to the Stargate that supposedly exists in Area 51.
A little bit about the DCTP.
Now that you brought that up, which implies travel through time as well as space, and you said that JROD was retrieved from a crash near Kingman. Was he at that time just traveling through space from the staging area, or?
Yes.
No? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
He wasn't doing any time traveling at that point?
No, not as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
Not as far as he told me, no.
Can you describe JROD to us, what he looked like and how?
Okay, this is the part where Dan Burrish describes what JROD looks like, and pay particular attention to the tint of the skin that he mentions. It's dark, like the alien that Jonathan Reed autopsied, and it's dark also like the aliens from the Virginia UFO crash back in 1996. And this is also occurring about 1996 as well.
How he behaved?
Yes. The gentleman with which I was associated was approximately 3.5 feet tall.
Which also the Virginia alien, as well as the alien in the Jonathan Reed autopsy, they were about 3 feet tall as well and dark-skinned.
He had a dark brown appearance, very ruddy appearance to his skin. He was in a highly pressurized CleanSphere. He exuded glycoprotein-like material through pores on his skin, which was associated with the neuritis, the neuropathy that with which we were dealing.
Did this have an odor to it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I couldn't perceive any odors whatsoever. He wanted to wear clothing and was refused in every turn. Called himself.
I think that the reason why they did not allow JROD to wear clothing was they wanted to make sure he wasn't hiding any weapons of any sort. So they kept him naked, which was very humiliating for JROD.
Called himself captive, and justifiably so. His feet were unusual in that his the plantar area had a very large knob underneath what we would call our heel. His facial features were grotesque in comparison to what he showed me what normal would be. He was
Normal of his type?
yes, yes. He was bilaterally symmetrical to the extent that the disease process was not changing his facial figures, his features. Nose was recessed, not a nose like we have, but basically two opercula, two orifices. An extremely small mouth, a hard palate, no teeth. His musculature, again, it was suffering from the problem at the myoneural junction due to the neuropathy.
Do you have any idea what his chronological age was?
622. He was willing. When I went in, for God's sakes, I took well over, nearly 300 individualized aspiration samples from his neurological system. He would hold his arm out for me to take them. There was no pain medication, and whenever I would fire the introduction system to remove the sample, it was an aspirative avulsion system, he would cry, and then he would just stand there and look at me.
There was a suction.
Yes, yeah. In fact, I would bring the sample after the initial removal from his tissues into the introduction system, and then approve it and move it from there to one of the helper biologists. Usually it was Robert, outside of the clean sphere, and then he would move it from there to be handled under our normal protocols. It was a level 5 past our the BMBL system.
So JROD sounded as though he was being worked on for some sort of physical ailment that he was suffering, possibly from being in our atmosphere. He was being maintained in that clean sphere, but he seemed to be very cooperative. As Dan Burris said, he would hold out his arm whenever they would take a sample of his skin.
He'd just stand there and take it.
So, do you feel the communication that he established with you when you were in contact with him, could he extend this communication over any distance?
60 feet.
60 feet?
Definitely 60 feet.
Okay.
It was 60 feet from the center of the clean sphere to the introduction ramp going down into the ambassadorial suite. So at least 60 feet.
So you don't feel like he's been in communication with you since that time?
No.
Okay.
Was it selective in some way? Was it willfully selective on his part who he wanted to communicate?
Yes. Yes. The folks that I'm sorry. The folks that wanted to find out what he was saying to me, they knew darn well that he was communicating with me after a while, because I was smiling. I couldn't help it, because we were actually joking back and forth. And they didn't know. They didn't have any clue. They didn't have any clue what he was saying. So it had to have been selective. They certainly wouldn't have pressed me like they did after I woke up from the big attention scenario. I woke up outside of the clean sphere. I was drug out of there by Stephen. He finally got a secondary suit on.
He's referring to the incident where JROD jumped on top of him and downloaded the information. It seemed as though he was being attacked to everyone else, but JROD was simply transferring information to Dan Burris.
And drugged me out of the clean sphere. No, they had no clue. They had no clue what he was saying. I'm sure of it. They were extra rough in removing my plug and my catheter and all of that business after I got out of the TES.
Yeah. One of the things that I want to ask you now, departing slightly from this subject, why, and of course you're going to have to restate this again, why are you talking to us
Okay, this part is important. This explains why Dan Burdish actually became a whistleblower, why he came out with this information and put his life at risk.
Now, what is your intention in telling us about this, about your involvement?
It's multifocal. It's multifocal. There's several reasons. The largest reason is not the most important reason. The largest reason from a personal perspective is to step out from under the Black Ops community and retire. I'm ready. This gets me thinking when we were doing introductions. We had regular systematic medicals by a physician. Following that, we would be suited, we would be catheterized, plugged, and suited. Communication apparatus was placed on our heads. We had a cooling system set up. It was, for all intents and purposes, it was a spacesuit. It was a total encapsulated suit, something like what you would find in a NASA facility.
Okay, so this is what he had to wear when he would go into the clean sphere and be exposed to JROD. It was almost like astronauts wear when they go up into space.
Not so much something that you would see, well, for instance, at USAMRIID or CDC, that type of level 4 suit. It was more of a regular space-type suit with joints. We were suited up, we were pressurized, and then walked with our cooling system and our hosing down a ramp into the ambassadorial suite. Following that, we were led up a gantry-way, which had been moved into position by the clean sphere, which had been previously rotated up through an iris through the floor. He was held actually below the ambassadorial suite level, and that was raised up as needed. What they did with him down there, he didn't say, and they didn't tell me. It was not a need-to-know issue. Apparently, they dealt with the cleaning of the sphere and all of that down there. The regular housed animal maintenance, as they treated him. We would be led up the gantry-way. The hoses would be hooked into an interior system inside the doorway, which was exterior to the clean sphere. And it was called the exterior system, in fact. But then we would be led in, the door would be closed, and we would be pressurized inside of the gantry-way. Following that, there was a drum system that was set up. Once there was an equal pressurization between the gantry-way and the clean sphere, we would then be told to proceed forward. I would raise a hand in acknowledgement. We were not supposed to talk at the time at all because nothing verbal around the specimen, around the JROD. Why, I was never told, but we were not supposed to talk around the JROD. I moved the drum system and re-hooked a secondary set of hosing inside the clean sphere, checked the pressurization, and once that was done, the door to the clean sphere would be closed behind me, and I would presume that the pressurization remained the same in the gantry-way. Following that, I would do my business inside of the clean sphere involving contacting the JROD and removing the samples.
And what was the reason you were removing samples?
We were removing samples to...
Okay, this is where Dan Burdish explains why he was there and what sort of work he was doing with JROD.
To attempt a treatment and certain genetic issues, and they were essentially they were losing heat, something like a dystrophy.
Okay, long story short, it's a very complicated way of explaining that JROD cannot survive in our atmosphere.
They've got a cell-mediated immune system, humoral system, just like we have. The cells are different. They've got Philopodia, but very strange-looking blood-like material.
So JROD seemed to have had something similar to what we call muscular dystrophy. In some way, our atmosphere affected him that way, and that's why he was kept in that clean sphere and why he had to be placed in that stroller whenever he was moved around. Now he's going to talk a little bit about the actual layout of Area 51.
Is one of the ERBs. It's an Einstein-Rosenbridge promoter. It uses some form of, this is found out, Jesus Christ, in the last 2 weeks. I'm asking the right questions there, I guess. It's composed of a spherical, spinning, arced, rectangular solid matrix of nickel, cadmium, and barium. There is a spinning disk underneath it, which is supercooled. Into this is injected into the center of these spinning, and I'm not a physicist, spinning disks, is injected an argon gas. Into that is injected.
Okay, so I believe he's talking about the layout of the Stargate that is in Area 51, reportedly.
Some type of repulsion matter. It's a gravity repulsion matter. They are obtaining the gravity repulsion matter from the heavy materials that have been obtained from the JRODs, the 115 variety material. And apparently when they bombard it with enough electromagnetism, this stuff repels gravity and it turns into some sort of exotic matter. They spin it fast enough, it opens, or they can see through it. And that is, from what I understand, the great prize in what's going on in the world right now, are those devices. Why do you think the British are running around Iraq right now looking for the climatological records that are just happen to be disappeared out of the Baghdad Museum with the rest of the cylinder seals?
So I believe he's referring to the Iraq War, when we were in Iraq and supposedly found a Stargate there in Baghdad.
So Dan, does that mean when they're engaging this device in Project Looking Glass?
Yes.
Is this something that they use only for the transmission of information, or can they transport a material object through time?
There have been mistakes. There were mistakes. Animals.
Okay, so he's referring now to teleportation. It was apparently some sort of a volunteer that got into this Stargate.
Were attempted to transport from one location to another, the production of 2 of the devices, and they put them in resonance or something like that. I'm not a physicist. I don't know. But I was, in fact, present during a human attempt. The human did not survive. The human was not put in there under duress of any sort. It was a volunteer situation, and the human did not survive.
Can you describe in detail the first time what it was like to meet this being for the first time?
Okay, so this is where Dan Burrish describes what it's like to meet JROD for the first time.
My original feeling was I was looking at a giant insect. It's the best I can just off the cuff. It looked like a giant insect, being dark brown and hunched in a corner, very insectoid in appearance. It almost looked like.
Okay, so again, a reminder that JROD was dark-skinned, just like the alien in the Varginha UFO crash.
Like it had an exoskeleton. I felt afraid inside because I was always told that monsters weren't real. I'm trying to remember what I was feeling when I was looking at the briefing books. Because even when we were first introduced to the JROD, they were him-hawing around as to his origin. Poppycock. I didn't believe it initially. I didn't believe it. However, I held open the possibility for interactions with humankind.
Okay, so here he's talking about the reference material that he was required to read before interacting with JROD.
For interactions with humankind, cross-contamination issues, They were full of as much information that I could take in during the times that they were allowing me to read them. Yeah, they were called King Tuts. They were update books.
The reference books that contained all the information he was required to read before interacting with JROD were called King Tuts, according to Dan Burrish.
Yeah. What was actually in these briefing documents? Can you explain a bit of the detail?
Close-knit, very well-ordered society.
He's talking about JROD's society here, of course.
One which is numerologically based. One which speaks to others that were called brothers, that I now find out are those who left on a spiritual path to another location, to Orion, the Epsilon Orionis area.
So he's saying that JROD is from Epsilon Orionis area.
Head-to-toe physiology, including real autopsy photographs, not the Santilli kind, but the real autopsy photographs. However, each of these that I was allowed into, they had separate folders and they had separate clips within them inside these three-ring binders. And I was told which numbers I was allowed to open up. And they were given to me on a card, and those are the ones that I was allowed to review during the times that I was allowed to review them. Most of the stuff, I mean, they had everything from military applications, the physics of the craft, and
Okay, so I think this is the part where he talks about how he wasn't so much interested in the physics of JROD's craft, but how he interfaced with the craft itself, which corroborates reports I've heard before of extraterrestrial craft being able to communicate with the pilot.
I couldn't have cared less. I was more interested in taking in the biology issues. Just doesn't interest me. Aside from the fact, from the biophysiological interface between the hand, mind, and the craft, because they have on their hands a number of pads, and there are open nerves which are protected by various glycoproteins. And those glycoproteins are selectively pushed forward or sucked back via capillary action, or they can be, through an active fashion, pulled back. And it kind of pulls a viscous sheath back and allows the JROD to have direct interface with the craft. That interested me. Although most of it at the time, and still some of it now, I have no understanding of. A lot of it has to do with electronics that I don't pretend to understand.
That also corroborates Dolly Safran's report when I had her on as a guest. She's the subject of Preston Dennett's book, Symmetry. In that, Dolly Safran claims that she was taught to pilot a craft using her mind and interfacing with a craft called Telera.
Most interested in looking at issues involving their histology, histopathology issues, including some autopsy photographs that showed disease processes which were naturally occurring within them.
How many beings have we had to work with?
I only met one. I am aware of possibly 3 from the reading.
Okay, so that part sounds true. He says that he only met JROD and is possibly aware of 3. So he's not exaggerating.
And at that time, again, I was so stunned by what I was doing. A lot of it was getting by me. When I read the word extraterrestrial, I tunnel visioned. And when I finally believed and understood that it was, in fact, an extraterrestrial, numb.
Okay, thank you. Just want to ask you a question about the telepathic communication, the nature of it. What is it actually like to communicate with one of these beings telepathically? And what do you hear something in your head? Do you hear images, see images, or?
I could hear my voice. No, you can hear yourself think. I could hear my voice. However, the cadence, the affect was something that distinguished it other than me. It was no great booming voice from the heavens or anything like that, and I'm glad I do not have a proclivity to hear voices in my head, and have heard none since. I could tell that it was somebody other than me, and I could tell because I felt drawn toward the subject that was sending the communication. When the JROD spoke with me prior to the bombardment of the images, it was something that was part of me, but not part of me. I actually felt non-resident for a moment. It was almost an OBE type feeling. And then I could feel myself pull back and...
Well, this is very interesting. He's giving a first-hand account of what it's like to telepathically communicate with JROD, and he's saying that it's almost like an OBE or an out-of-body experience.
Experience the sound. It was physical. It was more real than touching an object. And that's the only real time that I felt anything, more physical than physical.
Is there a sort of conveyance of emotion during these communications?
100% emotion. If he was upset, I could feel his pain.
Okay, so here Dan Burrish is confirming that extraterrestrials have emotions. They're just like you and I. They feel pain, sad, happiness.
It got to the point where, as I was doing the needle introductions, I could feel what he was feeling. So as I would inject the needle under the integument and find my proper location prior to removing the sample, I could feel the needle entering him, so I could feel his feelings.
Were you aware of Bob Lazar or anything when you were there?
Okay, so I found this interesting. The interviewer asked Dan Burrish if he's aware of Bob Lazar, which they should have been there approximately about the same time, the mid-1990s. And as we all know, Bob Lazar is a famous whistleblower who came out and said that he had worked there and at Area 51 and had seen a couple of UFO craft and confirmed that several times in the public media.
I saw a guy out on the MAC outside of the Galileo, the 401 area. He was barefoot. And he was just staring off in the distance. This is as we were coming in on the helo. And they keep you within a very confined walking area. This is before they started taking the buses. We were choppered in. When I saw him subsequent to that, when he did the famous nap videos, could have been. It could have been. And this was early on. This was. I can't prove it. Okay, and I could not positively identify that being Bob. I am aware of his name being mentioned up there, and it was associated with the term bottle washer, which means an engineer, but not a working group leader or anything of the kind. They would have said a DIR or a for director or a geek. I was called a geek, but his name was mentioned. I heard the name Lazar. I didn't hear Bob. I heard Lazar, and it was not Laser. It was definitely Lazar that I heard. But I never had interaction with him or, in fact, anyone else from Galileo, Sidekick, or Avionics.
Okay, so I spent a lot of time on Dan Burrish because I found his descriptions credible And as I said, Mike Schrad found him credible also. But George Knapp did not find him credible, nor did Bob Lazar. So Dan Burrish was asked by the interviewer there whether he had seen Bob Lazar while he was at Area 51. And he vaguely said that he might have seen somebody that looked like him or noticed a name like Lazar. But Bob Lazar himself afterward said that he had never seen Dan Burrish and didn't believe his story. George Knapp as well tried to debunk Dan Burrish's story. So George Knapp later on did an expose on Dan Burrish and found out that he never received a PhD from Stony Brook as he claimed. Never heard of him. Instead, he had worked as a parole officer and had posted pictures of himself in military uniform, even though he had never served in the military. He also had a publicist and put out several DVDs and had a website. He does sound very credible, though. And that's why I spent so much time showing how he speaks and terminology that he uses as a microbiologist. It's comes across as very believable, but apparently George Knapp has exposed him as a con artist. I'm not 100% convinced yet, though. I put this out there to let you guys make up your own minds. The similarity in all three cases is that all three aliens were dark-skinned and about 3 feet tall. In the first case, with the real alien autopsy, that case, Jonathan Reed, I think he also might have been a con artist. The Virginia UFO crash video, that's authentic. It's never been debunked, and that was a dark-skinned alien. As far as this Dan Burrish, if he is a con artist, he's very convincing because, as I said, the UFO researcher Michael Schratt devoted a whole PowerPoint presentation to him. My name is Al Barros. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And let's remember those kids out in Gaza and the Ukraine. They're lonely and afraid. They need a prayer or two. Let's manifest a positive shield of protection for all those kids. Thank you. Thanks for listening to my podcast.